When my Aunt Evelyn passed away, the world seemed to lose a little of its color. She wasn't just family. She was a storm wrapped in silk, a woman who lived unapologetically in her own rhythm. As a kid, I used to watch her glide across rooms with that quiet authority that made people stop mid-conversation. She had no children, no husband, no long list of accomplishments carved into marble. Just a beautiful old house by the lake, filled with perfume, paintings, and stories no one ever told. I hadn't visited her in years, not since college, and even then I remember she looked at me strangely, like she was waiting for something I didn't yet understand. When the lawyer called me in for the will reading, I didn't expect much. Maybe a photograph, maybe a book. But as I sat across from him in that heavy oak office, the air thick with dust and lemon polish, he handed me a small velvet box and a sealed letter with my name written in her graceful, looping handwriting. Her scent still lingered faintly on the envelope, jasmine and cedar. My throat tightened. To my dearest nephew Daniel, the letter began. I've watched you struggle with an identity you can't quite name. I see the gentleness in your soul that this world keeps asking you to bury. I want to give you a gift, and a challenge. For 1 year, I ask that you live not as the man you think you are, but as the person I believe you were always meant to be. Inside the box lay a small silver key and a folded note. Begin at the lake house. Everything you need is there. I didn't understand what she meant. Not fully. Maybe she'd lost her mind near the end, or maybe this was her way of leaving a poetic message for me to decipher. But something inside me stirred, something fragile and curious that refused to ignore her words. 2 weeks later, I drove down the winding country road to her lake house. The air was crisp, the world wrapped in the soft melancholy of early autumn. The house sat quietly by the water, its white shutters faded and ivy creeping across the porch railings like green lace. I hesitated before unlocking the door, half expecting her to be standing there in her long silk robe, smiling that secret smile of hers. The inside was exactly as I remembered. Elegant chaos. Scarves draped over chairs, lipstick-stained teacups, half-burnt candles on the mantel. But on the grand piano sat a large box with my name written again, this time in bold, deliberate ink. When I opened it, I found clothing. Dresses, blouses, skirts, delicate underthings folded with reverence. And beneath them, another letter. If you choose to honor my wish, you will live here for 1 year, as Evelyn saw you. I've left everything you'll need. You'll find peace if you stop resisting who you are. You may leave at any time, but only once you truly understand why you came. My pulse quickened. I wanted to laugh, to shout that this was absurd, but the stillness in that house wouldn't let me. I could almost hear her voice whispering, "You've hidden too long, Daniel." That night I couldn't sleep. The moonlight filtered through lace curtains, illuminating the dresses hanging across the room. They seemed to watch me, soft and patient. I tried to tell myself this was just a silly inheritance condition, something I'd humor for a few days before returning to my life. But deep down, something about it felt inevitable. The next morning, I stood before the mirror with trembling hands, holding one of her silk blouses. It smelled faintly of her perfume. The fabric whispered against my skin as I slipped it on, and for the first time in years I felt, not strange, not ashamed, but calm. Like a piece of a puzzle had quietly clicked into place. I stared at my reflection, half me, half memory, and whispered to the empty room, "All right, Aunt Evelyn. Let's see what you meant." Outside, the lake shimmered in the morning light, vast, silent, and waiting. And somewhere within that silence, I felt the first tremor of something that would change my life forever. The first week felt like walking through someone else's dream. Every corner of the lake house carried her presence, the faint echo of her laughter, the scent of powder and roses, the rustle of silk brushing against old wood floors. I tried to treat the whole thing as a temporary act, a private joke between me and the dead. I told myself I'd wear her clothes for a few days, take a few pictures to prove I had honored her wish, then return to the city and forget this ever happened. But life has a way of reshaping you in quiet increments. I found myself spending hours in front of the old vanity she used, the mirror slightly fogged, the drawers filled with makeup and trinkets. One afternoon, while sifting through them, I discovered a small notebook tied with a pink ribbon. Inside were pages of her handwriting. Instructions, guidance, reflections. The first page read, "If you are reading this, my dear, then you have chosen to begin. The world will resist you, and so will your reflection. But persistence is how the truth reveals itself. Each morning dress not as costume, but as continuation." Her words lingered in my mind long after I closed the book. That evening I decided to commit, just for one full day. I took a long shower, shaved carefully, dried my hair and opened the wardrobe. My hands shook as I chose a light sundress, soft blue with white trim, delicate enough to make me hesitate. When I slipped it over my body, it draped differently than I expected. The fabric moved with me, not against me. Didn't feel wrong, just felt new. I stood before the mirror again, my reflection blurred between disbelief and curiosity. The transformation wasn't complete, but something about the way the dress moved made me feel oddly grounded. I added a small touch of lipstick, guided by trembling hands and her notebook's instructions. When I finally looked up, my breath caught. I didn't look like a stranger. I looked like someone I'd been hiding all along. The day passed in silence. I walked along the lake, the hem of the dress brushing against my knees. Every step made me feel exposed, vulnerable, but also alive. The wind tugged at my hair, and for the first time in years, I noticed how it shimmered under the sunlight. I laughed quietly to myself, an unfamiliar sound, light and nervous. But then the fear returned. What if someone saw me like this? What if I started believing what she believed? That night I couldn't sleep again. I sat on the porch with her old notebook in my lap, reading entry after entry. She had written about her own life, her regrets, her loneliness, and her hope that I would find the courage to live freely where she never could. "You remind me of the girl I once wanted to be," she wrote on one page. "Maybe that's why I loved you so much. You were the reflection I never dared to see." The words struck me like lightning. Was that why she'd left me this strange challenge? Because she saw herself in me, the parts she buried beneath expectation and silence. Over the following weeks, I began following her guidance more carefully. Each morning, I'd read a new page of her notebook. One day she'd write about confidence, about standing tall even when the world looks away. Another day she'd talk about softness as strength. And slowly, my movements began to change. My voice softened without effort. My reflection, once a source of confusion, started to feel like an evolving story instead of a mistake. By the second month, I stopped flinching at my reflection. But the challenge deepened when I ventured into town for the first time. I told myself it was just to buy groceries, but as I walked through the small market wearing one of Evelyn's simple skirts and a cardigan, I could feel the eyes. Some curious, some judging, some warm. My heart pounded, and every instinct screamed to turn around, to disappear. But then I heard her voice again, faint but clear. "Stand tall, my dear. Truth never hides." So I did. I walked through that market like I belonged because in some small, fragile way I did. The cashier smiled, and though I could tell she was confused, she didn't say a word. That small act of normalcy, that single moment, felt like the bravest thing I'd ever done. When I returned home, trembling and exhilarated, I found another note waiting on the vanity. "Proud of you," it read in her unmistakable handwriting. "Now the real challenge begins, to see yourself not through fear, but through freedom." I didn't know how she could have written it. Maybe it had been there from the beginning and I'd missed it. Or maybe she was still here in some unseen way, guiding me. The thought should have frightened me, but instead it filled me with warmth. The days blurred into weeks. My hair grew longer, softer. My movements became natural. I spoke less but felt more. I started painting again, something I hadn't done since I was a teenager. The lake house became a sanctuary where I wasn't pretending anymore. Still, there were nights when doubt crawled in. When I'd catch my reflection in the dark window and wonder who I was becoming, or if I was simply losing my mind. The person I saw there wasn't the Daniel I had known. But neither was it a stranger. It was someone becoming. And as the 5th month began, I realized the challenge wasn't about wearing dresses or makeup. It was about endurance, the kind that forces you to confront every lie you've ever told yourself about who you should be. And in that confrontation, something inside me began to break, beautifully, painfully, open. By the time winter rolled in, the lake house no longer felt borrowed. My footsteps echoed differently on the wooden floors, lighter somehow. The mornings had their own rhythm. Coffee brewing, hair brushed smooth, the soft hum of music from the old radio Evelyn used to love. The air carried the scent of lavender and candle wax. And for the first time in my life, silence didn't feel like loneliness. Felt like peace. I had learned to move with a kind of grace I didn't recognize as mine. At first, it had been conscious. Small gestures, practiced movements, the deliberate way I'd fold my hands or tilt my head. But now they were natural. There was no trying. The motions came from somewhere inside me, guided by a quiet certainty I couldn't name. I'd stopped calling myself Daniel aloud. Not by choice really, it just felt misplaced. One morning, I found another note tucked inside Evelyn's notebook, a single line written in her elegant hand. Names can be cages. When you're ready, choose the one that feels like freedom. I stared at those words for a long time. That evening, I stood before the mirror again, the one that had witnessed every fragile step of my transformation, and whispered softly, "Danny." Felt right. Not an invention but a return. The syllables carried warmth, as though Evelyn herself had chosen it for me long ago. "Danny," I repeated, watching my reflection's lips move, watching her eyes soften as if she'd been waiting for that moment. I smiled. My first unguarded, genuine smile since arriving at the lake house. As weeks passed, I became part of the small town's quiet rhythm. The woman at the market began greeting me with a knowing smile. The barista in the cafe down the road started remembering my order, a chai latte with honey instead of sugar. The world didn't end when people saw me. In fact, it became gentler. But not everyone was kind. One afternoon, while picking up mail from the local post office, I overheard two older men whispering, laughing under their breath. One of them muttered something cruel, a word that burned even through the winter chill. I froze for a moment, my hands gripping the edge of the counter. Then I remembered Evelyn's words. Truth never hides. I turned to them, met their gaze, and simply said, "Have a nice day." My voice didn't shake. It didn't need to. I walked out of there taller than I'd ever stood as Daniel. That night, I sat by the fire, Evelyn's notebook open beside me. I realized how much she'd known, how deeply she must have understood this journey. Her challenge wasn't about playing dress-up or honoring her memory. It was about breaking the wall between who I was told to be and who I actually was. Yet the more I grew into Danny, the more I felt her presence thickening around me. Sometimes late at night, I'd hear faint music from the upstairs parlor, her favorite waltz. Other times, the faint sound of heels across the hall. Once, when I whispered "thank you" aloud before sleeping, I swore I felt the faintest brush of a hand against my cheek, as if she'd heard me. There was magic in that house. Not the kind you see in stories, but the quiet magic that comes when love leaves a trace behind. By the 3rd month of living as Danny, I stopped keeping track of time altogether. The mirror no longer startled me. It welcomed me. My reflection was soft, poised, and alive. My body felt lighter, not changed entirely, but at ease in ways I couldn't explain. Even my posture, the way my clothes fit, the way I carried myself, everything had subtly shifted, like the house itself was reshaping me. Then one evening, while clearing out Evelyn's attic, I found something that made my breath hitch. A framed portrait of her in her youth, standing beside a person who looked almost exactly like me. The resemblance was uncanny. The same eyes, the same faint dimple when smiling. On the back of the photo, written in faded ink, were the words, "Evelyn and Danny, 1973. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt. My mind raced. Was this a coincidence? A relative I'd never known? Or was this Evelyn's way of telling me something I hadn't yet realized? That the person I was becoming wasn't new at all, but remembered. That night I dreamt vividly. I stood by the lake under a silver moon. Evelyn appeared across the water, her hair loose, her smile serene. "You're almost there, my dear," she said softly. "You've begun to remember. Let go of what you think you lost." I woke with tears on my cheeks, the dream still humming in my chest. The next morning I dressed carefully, as though preparing for something sacred. A pale cream dress, Evelyn's favorite earrings, and her old perfume. When I looked into the mirror, I didn't just see Danny. I saw continuity. Her, me, the invisible thread tying generations together. Adaptation wasn't about becoming someone else. It was about surrendering to what had always been waiting to surface. Still, questions lingered like shadows at the edge of the lake. Why did she choose me for this? What truth was I still blind to? Why, even now, did it feel like she was guiding me toward something larger than identity, something spiritual? The answers hovered close but refused to reveal themselves. Until one morning, while lighting the fireplace, I found an envelope tucked inside the stack of old logs. It was sealed with red wax, Evelyn's seal. My hands trembled as I opened it. "Dearest Danny," it began. "If you are reading this, then you have become who I always knew you were. But you have not yet understood why. Come to the lake at midnight, 5 months from the day you began. Bring no fear, only faith. The rest will reveal itself." I read the letter 3 times, my heart racing faster with each line. The 5th month was only weeks away. I didn't know what waited by the lake that night. But I knew deep down that the truth Evelyn had promised, the one buried beneath all this mystery, was finally drawing near. The air around the lake had changed. Even the silence carried weight now, heavy with expectation, like the world itself was holding its breath. The days leading up to the 5th month passed in a blur of stillness and whispers, the kind that filled the house when dusk fell and the shadows grew long. I'd read Evelyn's letter so many times the paper had softened at the edges. "Come to the lake at midnight, 5 months from the day you began." I had marked the date in my mind. Each sunrise brought me closer, but I wasn't sure if I was ready, not for whatever waited out there, and not for what it might reveal about me. Every day felt like both a preparation and a farewell. I began talking to Evelyn aloud, half joking at first, but sometimes I could almost feel her listening. "Why did you choose me?" I'd whisper. "What did you see that I couldn't?" The house responded in its own quiet ways. A flicker of candlelight, a sudden scent of jasmine, the soft rustle of fabric in an empty room. I stopped being afraid. The fear that once lived in my chest had turned into a kind of reverence. One afternoon, while brushing my hair by the window, I caught my reflection in the glass. The face looking back wasn't Daniel's anymore. It wasn't even a version of him. It was mine. Danny's, calm, luminous, real. There was no performance left, no disguise. My voice, my body, my very gestures had become extensions of something true that had always been buried beneath the surface. The lake glimmered outside, pale and endless. I could almost hear Evelyn's voice whisper through the waves. "You've come so far, my dear. Now you must remember." That night, I found another hidden page in her notebook, one that hadn't been there before. It was folded between blank sheets, written in her familiar looping hand. "When you stand by the lake, do not ask who you are becoming. Ask instead who you have always been. The truth was never hidden, only forgotten. Look within the reflection, and you will see me." Those words settled deep inside me, sparking a memory I didn't know I had. A faint image. A child sitting beside Evelyn at the piano, both of us wearing matching ribbons in our hair. But that couldn't have been real. I was sure I'd never done that. Wasn't I? The 5th month's final night came wrapped in fog and moonlight. The lake shimmered like liquid glass, a mirror between worlds. I wore the cream dress Evelyn had loved, the same one from my dream, and draped her shawl around my shoulders. The key she'd given me at the very beginning hung from a chain around my neck. The world was utterly still as I stepped outside. Every sound, the crunch of leaves underfoot, the gentle whisper of wind, felt amplified, sacred. The house stood behind me like a silent witness as I walked toward the lake's edge. Midnight struck. The air grew colder, charged with an unseen pulse. I knelt by the water, my reflection trembling on its surface, a woman with wide, searching eyes. I whispered softly, "I'm here, Aunt Evelyn. I did everything you asked. But I still don't understand. What did you see in me?" For a long moment nothing happened. Then, a ripple moved across the water. Slow, deliberate. My reflection shifted. The features blurred, reshaped, until it wasn't me anymore. It was her. Evelyn's reflection stared back at me. Serene, smiling, her eyes shimmering like silver under the moonlight. My breath caught in my throat. "Evelyn," I whispered. The reflection nodded once. "You've done well, my dear," her voice echoed, not in my ears but in my mind, clear and soft. The challenge was never about wearing my clothes or living in my house. It was about remembering what you lost, who you were before the world told you otherwise. Tears welled in my eyes. "Remember. I don't understand." Her smile deepened, sad and kind. "You were mine once. My reflection, my little Danny. The world took you from me, reshaped you, made you forget. But I knew, even as the years passed, that somewhere inside you were still there. That's why I left you this task, to bring you home." I shook my head, trembling. "That's impossible. I was never." "You were," she said gently. "Not by body but by spirit. You are my continuation, my echo, my peace." As her words settled, something inside me cracked open, not in pain but in clarity. Flashes flooded my mind. Laughter by the piano, the scent of lavender, Evelyn brushing my hair as a child, whispering, "You're my mirror, my little light." I had thought those were dreams. But they were memories, ones I'd buried deep, replaced with the story the world told me to live. The truth was so simple, so profound it hurt to breathe. I wasn't living as Evelyn's vision. I was living through it, through the version of me she had always seen clearly when no one else could. She hadn't given me a new identity. She had returned my old one. I collapsed to my knees, sobbing, the reflection in the water shimmering with my tears. "Thank you," I whispered. "Thank you for bringing me back." Her voice softened. "Now, my dear, live as yourself, no longer as a challenge but as a truth. You've found peace, and through you so have I." The reflection rippled, fading back into mine. But the feeling, her warmth, her presence, stayed, filling the night air like the scent of jasmine and rain. I knew she was gone, truly gone now, but she had left me whole. When I finally stood, the lake was still again, perfectly mirrored, perfectly calm. The stars reflected on its surface like scattered diamonds. I touched the key around my neck, the last remnant of her gift, and whispered, "I remember." And for the first time I felt weightless. Not Daniel pretending, not Danny emerging, but me, complete, seen, alive. That night I didn't dream of her again. I didn't need to. Because now, she lived where she'd always meant to, inside me. The morning after the lake, the world seemed different. Brighter, quieter, somehow gentler. The air felt newly born. The trees shimmered with frost, their branches catching the first sunlight like crystal veins. I stood at the window, wrapped in Evelyn's shawl, the lake still and silver beyond the glass. For a long time I just breathed. Every inhale felt like release. Every exhale a prayer. The house, once a place of echoes, now felt alive again. But it wasn't haunted anymore, it was humming. The floorboards creaked softly beneath my feet as if greeting me, the scent of jasmine lingering faintly in the corners. I no longer felt like a visitor in Evelyn's world. I was part of it now, seamlessly, naturally. Her portrait still hung above the fireplace, her calm eyes watching. Yet now, when I looked at it, I didn't feel distance. I felt continuity. Two lives intertwined through memory, love, and rediscovery. She hadn't transformed me into someone new. She had reminded me who I had always been beneath all the noise and fear. I spent that morning cleaning the house, lighting every candle I could find. It felt ceremonial somehow, as though I was closing one chapter and opening another. When I finished, I sat at her piano and rested my fingers on the keys. The notes that followed weren't perfect, but they were alive. I played the waltz she loved, my hands trembling, tears falling freely. Halfway through I felt it, the faint warmth of her presence behind me. Not a ghost, not an illusion, but something purer. A quiet reassurance that she was at peace, and so was I. When the final note faded, I whispered, "Thank you for everything. I'll live well. I promise." That night I wrote in her notebook, now our notebook, for the first time. "Dear Evelyn, you were right. The truth was never far. It was always waiting under my skin, patient and kind. I am no longer pretending. I am no longer lost. I am Danny, the reflection you saw, the life you hoped would bloom. I've found my peace." I closed the book and left it on the vanity, beside her old perfume and the silver hairbrush we both used to love. Then I looked at my reflection one last time that night. There was no hesitation now, no confusion. Just a quiet smile and soft eyes, the same ones that had once looked so afraid, now calm, sure, complete. In the weeks that followed, I began painting again. Not for distraction but for expression. I painted the lake, the moonlight, the reflection of two women, one older, one younger, their faces merging where the water met the sky. It was the truest image I'd ever created. When spring finally came, I decided it was time to leave the lake house for a while. Not to escape it, but to carry it with me. To take what Evelyn had given and share it beyond those walls. I packed a single suitcase. A few dresses, her letters, the key, and the notebook. The rest I left untouched, preserved, sacred. Before locking the door, I turned one last time toward the piano and whispered, "Goodbye, Evelyn." A breeze moved through the open window, carrying with it the scent of jasmine and cedar. Her answer, soft and familiar. As I stepped outside, sunlight bathed the garden. The reflection in the lake shimmered, but this time it wasn't just me or her. It was both, intertwined, eternal. Walking down the path to the car, I caught my reflection in the glass one last time. I smiled, not out of pride or relief but gratitude. I wasn't stepping into the world as someone reinvented, but as someone rediscovered. Evelyn had given me the courage to see the truth. Identity isn't built. It's remembered. The drive back to the city felt like awakening from a long, tender dream. Yet, the calm I carried stayed with me, unshakable. The streets were busy, people rushing past. But for once, I didn't feel invisible. I walked among them as Danny, whole and alive, my reflection finally matching the rhythm of my heart. In time, I began helping others find their reflection, too. Not by preaching or explaining, but by listening. There were so many stories, so many quiet souls waiting to be seen. And every time someone found the courage to be themselves, I felt Evelyn's smile somewhere just beyond the veil. Sometimes at night I still dream of the lake. The moonlight dances across the surface and she's there, not apart from me but beside me like always. We don't speak in those dreams. We just watch the ripples at peace. And when I wake I know, her wish has been fulfilled. Because in finding myself I gave her what she'd always wanted. Continuation, truth, and love without boundaries. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to our channel.